Hello, and welcome to the death of a star. So, when a star goes through its red giant phase, it burns through fuel. In its core, it burns helium to carbon, carbon to nitrogen, and neon, and a whole variety of other fusions can take place depending on the size of the star. The bigger it is, the hotter it'll be in its core, and the more fusion can take place. Um, Now, how a star dies depends on its mass. For stars that have a mass smaller than 8 times the sun at the beginning of their lives, they will tend to end up as a white dwarf. Basically, what happens is fusion stops in the core, and so the gases gravity wins, and so since there's no fusion going on, they compact and they compact and they compact. You can see here, we see a picture of a white dwarf that is the same size as the sun, and its radius is essentially the same as the Earth. So if the sun gets to a white dwarf phase, it would be approximately the size of the Earth. Obviously, if a star was 8 times bigger than the sun, it would end up bigger than this. And if it was smaller than the sun, it would end up smaller. But at this point, there's no fusion going on. The outside has compacted just like the inside, but it never reaches a temperature to do more fusion. And so as that outer layer compacts, it heats up, and so the outside of the star will be glowing white hot. This is obviously much more dense than the Earth because it's the mass of the sun, which is much bigger than the Earth, and yet the same size. So at this point, the star will have shed a lot of its mass, and so even a star that's 8 times bigger than the sun when it was formed will by this time be approximately 1.5 times the mass of the sun. It will have shed approximately 70% or so of its mass during various red giant stages of expanding out, and some of that mass drifts off. So then the second stage is for the stars that are between 8 and 20 times the mass of the sun at the beginning of their lives. They will end up with final masses of 1.5 to 3 times the mass of the sun, and they will become a neutron star. Before they do that, they will go through a process called supernova. At that point, the core fuses all the way to iron, and then suddenly stops fusing because beyond iron, the mass of the nucleons gets bigger, which means if we're fusing them, we're gaining mass, which means losing energy. So that doesn't happen in a prolonged basis because it sucks up the energy. So it fuses to iron, all of a sudden stops. The core of that red giant then starts free fall because there's no fusion anymore. Gravity's winning, and all of a sudden, it's like people let go of the rope of a tug of war, and one side just wins by a landslide. So gravity's winning, and we get this compaction that slams the inside down into a neutron star. And the outer layer, as it comes in and fusion happens, because of all the energy of this tremendous free fall from like the orbit of Venus, right, or beyond, and free fall hits, fusion happens, and it explodes back out in that kind of two-way implosion and explosion of the outer layers. That forms what's called a planetary nebula. It's in this explosion that is the only time that there's enough energy present that it doesn't matter that it sucks up energy to fuse past iron because there's so much energy around. And so as far as we know, every atom beyond iron, number 26 on the periodic table, was formed in a supernova as this outer layer kind of hits and ricochets off into space, forming that planetary nebula. The inside then has come together with such force that it overcame the the electrostatic repulsion of nuclei to nuclei or electron to electron, however you want to think of that. And basically the protons and the electrons fuse together to give us neutrons, so we just have neutrons. You can see here that here we're looking at a star that's 1.5 times the size of the sun, which would be the smallest neutron star, would have started out 8 times the size of the sun, and it ends up 12 miles in diameter. So a little bit smaller than the distance from here to the beach. Obviously very small. Well, what's happened? Well, remember we talked about atoms, that the nucleus, if we were to blow up an atom so that the atom was the size of a baseball stadium, like Angel Stadium, then the nucleus would be the size of a marble. And when we get two atoms together, it's like putting these two baseball stadiums next to each other, the marbles in the center of each one, and the electrons and the repulsion keep those nuclei from getting any closer. Well, if we get rid of all the charge, all the positive protons, all the negative electrons, those two nuclei can go sit next to each other. Okay? And essentially, it's like Rick Moranis, Honey, I Shrunk the Star. That's the idea behind his movie, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Removing the space in the atom shrinks things down. Now, keep in mind, in that movie, the kids were a lot lighter, too. In reality, they should have kept all their mass, and they should have sunk right into the dirt, just like high heels would sink into the dirt. They're that small, and they have all the mass that they had before, because they didn't get rid of any mass, just the space, and so they should have sunk right through. The neutron star is the same idea. If we went over to a neutron star and chipped off a little tiny piece the size of the head of a pin, and put that in one hand, then we'd have to imagine going to Egypt and lifting up in the other hand one of the Great Pyramids. And so we'd have the Great Pyramid in this hand and the little tiny piece in the neutron star, and they would have the same amount of mass, because all that space has been removed, and so they're incredibly dense. Because of this, because they're so small, they went from this huge neutron or red giant that was rotating, and they shrunk down. So just like ice skater bringing their arms in when they're spinning in order to conserve angular momentum, when that happens, they start spinning incredibly fast. And so neutron stars have incredibly fast spins. Okay, the last thing is if a star has more than 20 times the mass of the sun when it's formed, then it will have so much gravitational pull and force during this free fall supernova that it will actually crush beyond a neutron star to what's called a black hole. And a black hole, you can see we've already gotten pretty dense. We took a star that starts out 8 times the size of the sun, and it's now 12 miles. Well, now we're going to take one 20 times the size of the sun, and it's going to crush down even smaller than this. It's actually going to crush down to what we'd consider a mathematical point. Okay, meaning that it has 0 width, 0 height, and 0 depth. It has 0 volume. Okay, so the mass is still there, but ends up with at least 3 times the mass of the sun. But that mass is in a single point. And we call this point a black hole. Okay? Now, I've got this thing up here that talks about the Schwarzschild radius. And I just want to talk for a moment about the idea of a black hole. A black hole, boy, my face disappeared. Now I'm a silhouette. Hello, hello, hello. Anyways, the idea of a black hole is that the force necessary to, or the force the force of attraction between two objects is based on 3 things: the mass of one object, the mass of the other object, and the distance between them. If you get them closer, then there's more force. Okay? Well, when we have a star, the closest you can get is the surface of the star. If you went inside of the star, then some of the mass is pulling you that way, so there's really no force if you're in the center of a star. But so the closest you can get to a star is about that far, okay, the radius of the star. Well, once it becomes a black hole and it's now a single point, now we can get twice as close. And if we're twice as close, the force is 4 times stronger than it ever could have been. And if we get 10 times closer, now the force is 100 times stronger than if we'd been on the surface of that star. If we get 1,000 times closer, the force is now 1,000,000 times stronger than when we were on the surface of that star. Now, the star, the black hole, has the same mass as it did before, so it's going to have the same effect on any object that's out here. Okay, it's only objects that come inside of where the surface of the star used to be that will experience a greater force and will therefore be sucked into the black hole. Now, keep in mind, the Earth sucks things into it. A meteorite that hits the Earth stays here forever, unless we put it on a rocket and send it off. Okay, a rock or meteor or comet that gets sucked into the sun, it's going to stay there. So the same idea is true of a black hole. So why the big deal? Why do movies depict black holes, these amazing magical things that suck up everything in space? Well, it's because a black hole you can get so close to that it's impossible to escape. It's even impossible for light to escape once it gets beyond a certain radius. And that radius is called the Schwarzschild radius. And you can see if the Earth were to somehow magically become a black hole, its Schwarzschild radius would be 1 centimeter, meaning literally if we put all the mass of the Earth into one spot, it's the radius that light would not escape would be 1 centimeter in diameter. Okay, Jupiter would be a little bit bigger, 3 meters. Okay, about the size of the front wall of a normal classroom. Well, okay, that's too big. Smaller than that. 3 meters. You get the idea. And if we get a star that's 3 solar masses, the smallest black hole, it'd be 9 kilometers. Okay, so that's not exactly saying that the star is 9 kilometers in diameter. It's saying that the star is 0 millimeters in diameter, 0. But anything within 9 kilometers will never escape it, because gravity is so strong that even light heading out will get turned around and pulled by gravity into the black hole. Now, keep in mind, 9 kilometers is much, much smaller than the sun is right now, and so this diameter in which it sucks everything in is much smaller than the sun, and the sun already essentially sucks in whatever's there, with the exception of things like light. So that is the 3 possible deaths of a star. So let's just review really quick. If the mass of the star begins its life at 8 times the size of the sun, it'll end its life at about 1.5 times the size of the sun or less, and it will be a white dwarf, which, by the way, I'm not sure I mentioned, will gradually cool down like taking a coal out of a fire. There's nothing fueling it, and so it'll fade and eventually become a black dwarf. If the star were between 8 and 20 times the mass of the sun to begin its life, well, at the end of its life, after it's shed lots of layers, it'll be 1.5 to 3 times the mass of the sun, and it will end its life through the supernova process, resulting in a neutron star. The final stage of the final type of star would be one that begins 20 times the size of the sun or bigger. As it sheds its layers throughout its life, it will end up at least 3 times the size of the sun, and during its supernova process will end as a black hole. So that's it. Death of a star completed the life cycle of a star, and who knows, maybe that planetary nebula will compact and start the whole process over again. Thanks for listening. We'll see you around on the scientific adventures of Beardman.